So today we're going to talk about Marx's work, Alienated Labor. It is really foundational for understanding Marx's larger philosophy of social change, right? He's most well known for coming up with this theory of socialism and communism, but Alienated Labor gives a great kind of insight into why he thinks capitalism is so messed up and why we have to go through major revolutionary changes to really make things better for the world, to really make things better for the common person, for the common human. And so Marx is well known for his involvement in an international workingmen's association. He was not just a philosopher, he was a sociologist, he was an economist, he was an activist. He really lived by what he believed. And so he lived a very kind of stressful life. He was exiled and he was very poor at the end of his life. And so the work that we're talking about, Alienated Labor, is from Marx's earlier philosophical writings. And then you'll see how Communist Manifesto comes in later, and it's much more applicable. It's a lot easier to understand. But Alienated Labor is basically Marx's philosophical reasoning for how capitalism is inherently alienating for the common person. And ultimately, everyone is alienated, not just the proletariat workers, also the bourgeoisie, the upper class, but they're alienated in a different way, and they're not trying to survive paycheck to paycheck the way the worker is. And so Marx's focus of alienated labor is on the worker, so the working class person, the person who has a job or multiple jobs, but is living paycheck to paycheck. They don't really have enough to save. They only really have enough to get by each day or each month. And so they don't really get to enjoy a fuller life or a higher standard of living because they're experiencing so much alienation and a disconnection from themselves and their work and the society that they live in. And so if you think back to when this was written, right, this was written in the early 19th century when the Industrial Revolution is a lot newer. People are experiencing its overall impact in profound ways. So the way work is being done has been completely revolutionized because instead of using people to do everything or using craftspeople who would need a lot of time to create a specific item, you are basically standardizing the process of production through having these large machines that have come through the Industrial Revolution. So you have more pollution, but you also have more efficiency. You have a lot of people whose jobs have been displaced because they can no longer do the work since machines and robots are doing it. We're not really robots, we're machines at this point. And so in our time, though, we'll see how robots might actually end up doing the work of that people used to do. But I do want to talk about more specifically how Marx is really focusing on historical materialism and alienated labor. So historical materialism is basically the theory that we talked about with thesis on Feuerbach with that essay, but historical materialism is basically how society functions, how society runs. And so in order to understand humanity and our thoughts and our ideas and our religion and our philosophy, we have to understand our material conditions. So what is the economic structure of society? How do we create things? How do we produce things? How is our labor engaged in? And so the material conditions that we live in, right, is capitalism, specifically in the US. And so our material conditions out of capitalism informs our life. It impacts our life. It impacts what we have to do, what we have to learn, what we eat every day, how we relate to other people, how we relate to ourselves. And so Marx believed that our material conditions, our economic structure, our labor, our capital, all those things impact religions of a society, impact the philosophy of society. They impact the media and the political structures of society. So in order then to understand how we as human beings can progress, we have to change and control our material conditions, meaning we have to change and overcome capitalism because he believes it is so alienating for the common person. And he says that he's starting from his present political economy, meaning how is the economic structure impacted and how does it impact everything else in society? And he doesn't want to assert facts into history. He really wants to understand history the way it occurred. And so he sees how human beings have been deprived of their species being at this point, right? Early to mid 19th century. And he's seeing the negative and devastating effects of the Industrial Revolution upon the common person, upon the proletariat. And so people are disconnected from their species being. What is species being? So species being is essentially what we as human beings have. It's our nature. It's our ability to say, you know what, we universally belong to this common human species. And we have the ability to think rationally and creatively and engage in this free conscious activity. But we are disconnected and cut off from our species being with alienated labor. And so what we see is that all of these amazing advancements have occurred with technology and medicine, and there's more efficiency and more products are being created, and you have the whole factory farming industry blooming, right? But at the same time, you have an increase in the world of things, but then you have a decrease in the human world. So things are put upon a pedestal, and the profit and all the money that's made from them is valued over the actual human being who's producing them. So you have, let's say, a car factory, and the car itself is valued, but the workers who are putting in all of this time and all this labor and all these sacrifices, they're not valued at all, right? They are just seen as a machine, right? How many items can you attach to this specific car? We don't care who you are or how you feel about anything, right? I need you to do this job because you need to be able to help our company make a profit, right? They don't care about the workers. And so what ends up happening is that you have the results of capitalist competition is that you have the power and the wealth in the hands of a few. And so you have a majority, the proletariat, the workers, who are basically establishing everything. So they are the ones who are doing all of this hard work, but then they're not getting any of the benefits. They're not reaping any of the rewards. So the object of one's labor has an alien kind of power. The worker doesn't feel connected to what they're producing. We as human beings should have a very, intrinsically valuable relationship to labor because it can be amazing, right? Think about how you feel when you do something that's like super fulfilling and super gratifying, right? You feel great, you feel empowered. Think about maybe when you write something or you create music or you create art and you feel so connected to what you're doing. You feel that autonomy, you feel that creativity. But this is not happening with alienated labor. The worker feels disconnected from what they're producing. They don't feel like they have any say in what they're doing, right? Their boss is telling them, this is how you have to do it. You can only take X amount of breaks. This is what you have to wear to work in some cases. And so they don't really feel like they have a connection to their object. And so the object of their labor then gains an external power that is separate from the human being, that is separate from the worker. So this is why the essay is called Alienated Labor, because the object itself has a special kind of power that exists separately from the worker. And so you see that the worker then exists as a physical object solely, right? The worker wakes up, goes to work, is exhausted because the job that they're doing is not fulfilling. They come home and then they're exhausted. They're too tired to read, completely understandable. And then they go to sleep and they wake up and they do the same thing over and over again. So that's what it means to exist as a physical object. You're not really engaging your creativity, your rationality. You're just kind of living a robotic life and you're not really thinking about why you're doing what you're doing. And you don't really have extra money to go to art museums and take trips and travel, right? You're just paying for those bare necessities if you can. So this whole structure of the bourgeoisie up here benefiting from the labor of the people here, right, that's not working for society. And so you end up having the rich being extremely wealthy and then the working class becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. And in 2019 and in the future, we're definitely going to see how more wealth has been unevenly distributed. So you see how this has increased over time in our present day. So in the next video, we'll talk about what is actually part of this alienating process.